Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we begin our fourth of 5 programs on technologies of hope. As we contemplate technology each day, I've been trying to provide a little context, and I want to return to a point that I made earlier in the week, that the understanding of how technology can be used by humanity had a breakthrough with the philosopher Pythagoras, who lived about 2,500 years ago in ancient Greece. You know, scientists sort of designate the beginning of technology about 600,000 years ago, when human beings first started to use fire. And it's worth noting that one of the first uses of fire was to generate food, warm food. And if you think about that's technology. It's the transformation of nature into culture with all the creation of the food and the drinks that we imbibe. So one of the first acts of human beings when they developed the use of fire was to cook food. Just an interesting notion about technology. It's not necessarily something big, it's something ordinary. And people use technology around the world in primitive ways, and then with civilization, they began to build cities, but no one really thought much about it until Pythagoras. And I want to make a couple of points about him that I think are very important. It was Pythagoras who understood through some insights in the field of music that the universe as we experience it, at nature as we experience it, is rationally knowable. And that breakthrough created the foundation of what has come to be Western civilization and now world civilization. Because if you can know nature, if you can discern the laws, which he said were ultimately mathematical and geometric, you could create all kinds of things that would enhance human comfortability and war and architecture and all kinds of things. But it was the insight around the rational knowability of nature that was at the heart of the Western tradition. And this is important because if we want to understand why over the last 500 years, the West conquered the world through colonialism and then with the Industrial Revolution, it's because at the heart of the Western dynamism is the fundamental principle of experimental science, because that's what the Greeks dove into. And of course, Aristotle was really the first scientist. But here I want to make a second point, which is the subject of this week. And I want to underscore it in the following way. When Pythagoras had his insight, there was all kinds of discussion amongst the Greek philosophers and politicians about what we do with the fact that if we know, this knowledge gives us extraordinary power. And it was Plato first that offered a critique. And he said, if you dissect nature without communing with nature, you become dangerous. And it was Aristotle, his student. Aristotle studied with Plato for 20 years and then became a biologist and really the first scientist. Aristotle's contemplation of science and technology always began with communing with nature. And in fact, he said, as a philosopher, you experience what he said was inexpressible pleasure when you just contemplate the grandeur of nature. And out of your contemplation of the harmony of nature, you begin to build the technology of the mathematics that you discern. That is the unitive state that allows humanity to use technology in accordance with the rhythms of nature rather than to dominate. Philo of Alexandria made the same point. He said that the philosophical life, the spiritual life, ultimately is a contemplation of the vastness of nature and the perfection of nature. And within that vastness, as Plato said, one experiences the enlargement of the soul. And that as you contemplate nature and you experience internally the mysteries and the harmonics, your soul is expanded to encompass as large as you can imagine, he says, and that creates the enlargement of the soul. And he made a point that I want to bring in as I conclude, that one of the ways that humans can experience nature in its ebb and flow, light and dark, the rhythms of the seasons, the movement of all the species as they interact with one another, is through dialogue. Because when humans come together and they pause in the hustle and bustle of the world, and they just dialogue in the spirit of open inquiry, particularly in a communion with the natural order, they reach a perfection of embodiment of nature that allows true inquiry and social discourse and governance, because what emerges from this is truth, beauty, and goodness. And I want to just offer this as a tribute to my very good friend, George Cappannelli, who I'll introduce in a moment, because it's been George more than anybody on Humanity Rising that has been really bringing in the passion for dialogue. And it's just worth contemplating, everyone, that as we dialogue, we're embodying nature. It's a beautiful thought with which to start today. Let us pause as we always do and just take a moment and just breathe together. As we breathe, the trees breathe. As we breathe, nature breathes. All the universe breathes together. So you'll hear the sound of a bell. And when you hear that sound of the bell, just breathe in. About 5.5 seconds, and you'll hear another bell and breathe out. We're going to take 10 breaths together to bring coherence and wonder and compassion and unity to our world. Georg? Thank you, everyone. Beautiful to breathe together knowing that the whole universe breathes as one. In that spirit, I'd like to bring in my two good friends and colleagues, George Cappannelli, the founder and CEO of Age Nation, Tom Eddington, who is the founder and CEO of Endangered Global, who are convening this program on technology and helping to build Humanity Rising as it evolves into Humanity Rising Network. So in the spirit of true dialogue, George, I turn the program over to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jim. As always, thanks for your insights and perspectives that help give greater context to these conversations and dialogues we have. Today is the fourth day of the Technologies of Hope series. And the more deeply we go into it, the more grateful I am that we decided on producing this series and making it an ongoing part of what will become Humanity Rising Network. If you didn't have the opportunity to participate in any of the other three shows, I can encourage you more. The wisdom and insight and perspectives of the guests speak to this new emerging conscious use of technology that has so many possibilities for us. Not in the old sense, in the 1700s when the Industrial Revolution began, people were under the illusion that technology would solve everything, and we've learned that there is a shadow side to technology, and our world, as we look around, is experiencing that today. So we have a wonderful program today. We had a number of people representing the masculine gender over the first couple of days, and today we're blessed to have two women with us, each doing some extraordinary work in the world. And in a minute, I'm going to turn the introduction over to Tom, and Tom will introduce both Sarah and Rose if she's joined us by now. And just one thing about dialogue, which I am a tremendous advocate for. Dialogue does come from the Greek dialogos, which means to inquire and to arrive at greater understanding and harmony through the mature sharing of different perspectives, as opposed to discussion, which comes from the Latin discutere, which means to shatter into pieces. And one of the reasons we have so much trouble in our world is that there's a hell of a lot of discussion and not as much dialogue. And if you think of what goes on in the halls of government and in the halls of many institutions, it is discussion. And then people wonder why there are so many separate pieces that never get put together. So let's get to our show. Tom, some opening remarks and then introducing our guests.
Yeah, thank you, George, and thank you, Jim. Jim, just picking up on your comments from Tuesday about technology and the Greek observations about technology, 600 BC. I was talking to a colleague I'm working with on my next documentary film, Anna Sofair, about Chaco Canyon, and the Chacoans had connected with nature and were manipulating nature in ways that at some point they realized that the technology was too dangerous, and the human consciousness they didn't have at the time was appropriate for the technology. And so they took their 75,000 square mile villages and structures and buildings, and over a series of years they burned the kivas, and they sealed up the buildings, because they realized they had done something with technology that they as human beings weren't capable of working with. And that wisdom, that insight, as I've been working on this film project, really has me looking at how humanity is dancing with technology. And part of my delight and pleasure in having Sarah Richardson with us today. And I just have been in correspondence with Rose Fernandez. And Rose is having technology problems this morning. She's unable to get her audio to work. So hopefully she's going to be able to join us today and bring her experience. But let me just share a little bit of background about Sarah. Sarah is the CEO of Leftfield Labs, which is a creative technology. She's a creative technology executive with more than 20 years of leadership in the experience design ecosystem. After graduating from the Design and Media Arts program at UCLA, she began cultivating close partnerships with leading brands and accomplished decision makers to grow the bounds of what's possible through human-centric technology. As the founder and CEO of Leftfield Labs, Sarah's combined industry-leading vision with an empathetic approach to deliver experiences that achieve successful business objectives and meaningful human impact for companies like Google, Amazon, Meta, Verizon, and Sony. Their areas of specialization include experiential, immersive, and digital products and platforms. Sarah strives to bring out the best in her teams while modeling a graceful commitment to the greatest possible good in every situation. And one of the things I love about Sarah and her work and the work of the firm is looking at using technology for good. I'll quickly share a little bit about Rose in the event that she's able to join us today. Rose has over 20 years experience in the beauty industry, serving in a number of key leadership roles in skincare brands in both the prestige and professional channels. And what I love about Rose and her work is that she brings her human-centered values to the beauty industry. So the organizations that she's led and worked for have focused on cruelty-free, no animal testing, using organic and regenerative practices. So there's limited negative impact on the environment and on other species. So I'll continue to be reaching out to Rose during our broadcast today in hopes that she's able to join us. But Sarah, let's start with you. Let's just have you share a bit about your approach to technology, your approach to leadership, and how you're working with some of the leading technology companies that are impacting the world, whether it's through social media or otherwise.
Well, I'd be delighted to share a little bit more, and thank you for that introduction, Tom. I think it's helpful to understand why I started Leftfield Labs. And, I had come from a traditional agency, which was very siloed, and I didn't feel there was the communication. There was dialogue, but not the deep communication to really, truly collaborate and create meaningful projects. And I felt that there was a better way to do this work and combine our tools in a more wise and impactful way. We're storytellers. We also happen to be technologists. So how do we really use those wisely in tandem and in powerful ways to exponentiate the end result? And that was the beginning of my journey in starting my company. So really the core is, how do we truly collaborate and create an environment for all of us to succeed? And, I think Jill Bolt-Taylor recently said in an interview, it's not good enough if I just succeed or if our clients just succeed. Our end users and consumers must also thrive, and the global communities that we serve must also thrive. And that's the core of any engagement that I encourage my team to really look for. We want to look for the scenarios that create mutual benefit without harm or disservice to anyone. And I'm really happy to say that we're seeing a lot more commitment from our partners now than we ever have. And this is 15 years now in this journey with Leftfield Labs. And initially, programs and initiatives around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or ESG, environmental, social, governance, those things were just barely a glimmer in our eyes. And now we're really seeing the desire, and we're seeing budgets allocated, and we're seeing that people are treating it seriously. And this is what is partly so encouraging for me. And I think going back to your question on our approach, it really does start with our, challenging of assumptions. It starts with how we challenge status quo and begin to engage in deeper dialogue around how we can meaningfully construct scenarios and solutions that haven't existed before, where we really are looking for the greater good in each configuration. I think the other thing I would just touch on too is the empathetic approach, which I know you already mentioned briefly. But one of the things, George, you spoke about, which is so true, it's a mindset shift. And sometimes, we just need to take a bit of a step outside of our bubbles and really, challenge ourselves, our own assumptions, and begin to think of a bigger context whereby these solutions can arise. And I believe empathy is really at the core of everything that we do. So some of our work, especially in the DE&I sphere, is around how do we shift our perspectives? How do we really change the way we see ourselves in relation to others? And when we can create a mindset shift like that, so much is possible that hasn't been possible before. So it all really begins with that. So creating an experience where there's an empathetic takeaway and we have a changed behavior, that's really the core of what drives successful outcomes, no matter what the initiative and what the business need. But that really does underscore every opportunity for us.
Yeah, during COP27, we had a panel on speed shifting mindset. And just in recognition of the state of the world, whether we're talking about social justice or climate change or climate disaster or anything else, it was this sense of urgency about needing to speed shift our mindset. And one of our guests was Dr. Mary Lee Adams. She wrote a book in 2016 called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And it really gets at the heart of what you're talking about is, we all will ask questions based on a set of assumptions. Right. And we have to really look at those assumptions. Right.
And I think we've come from an era of more of a bifurcated approach. Either you win or I win. And, a model of more patriarchal systems or of dominance or aggression versus more egalitarian. How can we all win? And when we start to look for that solution set in everything, it changes the conversation and it changes our approach. So I absolutely agree with what you're sharing.
Sarah, when you talk about this change in mindset, and as I listen to you, I realize that you have the distinct advantage of being a woman. And in a world desperately in need of that mind shift, desperately in need of empathy and that kind of understanding, you're miles ahead of us. And I wonder what your experience is in the environments in which you work, as to how that both supports you, how the women that are part of the teams that you work with can become your allies, and how men are reacting to that shift.
Wow, such a good question. I can speak for me personally that it matters deeply how we all feel. And I do think that may be something that many women share. Not to stereotype, but I do believe that for me, it's very important that our teams are healthy, that we are constantly in communication, and that we ask ourselves, what do we want people to feel? And how do we guide the conversations in a way so that we can really bring about the best and output? And I feel like many of us at Leftfield really share that is a common denominator. I recently had this incredible experience with a lot of, with our leadership team, and many of the men on my leadership team said, Sarah, we want to support you, and we really believe in what you're doing, and we want you to know that we're here. And for me, it was such an incredible incredible shift to feel like, oh, I don't need to do it all. I don't need to carry this banner on my own. But this is something that our leadership team really does embrace fully. And I didn't feel that that was always the case, but I feel like we've gotten there now. And it's incredibly gratifying and amazing when we talk about the whole, and that we are exponentially greater together as a team. And that's why we work so well and can do the work that we do, because we each bring an ingredient to the table, and we can cook these incredible meals that we serve to the world that I wouldn't be able to do on my own. And I fully embrace that and have from day one. And I do think that there is an advantage there in something that might be a more feminine approach. And it's not to say that it's out of balance. I think the masculine and feminine are equally important. That's the new era that we're in. It's really looking at it from these egalitarian standpoints so that we all have voice, we all have agency, we all can bring meaningful contributions to the table. And that, I feel, is really also at the core of creating not just a sense of belonging, but true belonging within our company and for our partners. When we each can actually bring meaningful impact and contribution, that's what separates just I think, a sense of feeling included. It's a very big difference, but sometimes very subtle and hard to always create within companies.
And I think that relief that you talked about when men on the team, gave you a sense that they not only understood, but endorsed and supported that direction. I think it's an experience that those of us who are men have when we realize that we don't have to carry the whole load either. And that when we're willing to get in touch with the feminine aspects of ourselves, it actually broadens our capacity to be effective in the world.
The whole person.
Yeah. And the same, I think, is true for the feminine when that kind of masculine element comes in and different levels of leadership and what's the right word? Not power or strength, but there's a different level that when that masculine and feminine are combined, how incredibly effective it is.
Absolutely. And an inertia that comes with that as well. And, I also, what comes to mind for me is, I've since the beginning had a somewhat altruistic vision for our vision at Leftfield Labs. And that hasn't always been fully embraced as well. But, to be able to usher that in and usher in a new way of doing business for others to adopt, and they are adopting, because they're seeing that it works and it makes business sense, and it makes sense from so many other perspectives from the larger global communities too. So there's a tremendous amount of movement there that hasn't always been the case. 15 years in, now we're all kind of starting to gel with that. So
that's some of the foundation, right? The philosophical, the conceptual foundation. Talk to us a little bit about how that translates into the technologies that you create.
Yes. So,
and particularly in an industry that's, very, very male dominated and is, in so many ways influencing the agenda of the world.
Yeah, and that's a really good distinction, Tom, because, when I was at an agency before starting Leftfield, this is, previous to 2009, it was very male dominated, and it still is. Our creative technology industry is very much still the case. And I'm typically, with external partners, the only woman in meetings. And while that's shifted internally at my company, that's still very much broadly the case. I think it's good to point out that it served us well in those early days because I didn't have any immediate models to go by, and I had to go by what felt authentic and right for me. And I wasn't tempted to follow a formula. of others because there wasn't any other female leader in this space. So it actually had a benefit in some ways. It was a bit of a blue sky, and I was able to really create what truly felt right for me. And I think how it manifests and shows up is, for the last 6 years or so, we've really been investing more in both, environmental, social good initiatives, including education, health, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'll name just a couple, and I'm happy to share in more detail. I'll also share in the chat a link to our work for audience members. You can take a look and see at your leisure. About 6 years ago, we partnered with Harvard University, and they wanted us to help them build an education platform. And this was around civil rights education, and really to rethink how we engage with students in a more meaningful way. And we looked at the vertical of education, and I still see it as vastly underserved by technology and innovation. And so we really worked very closely together to rethink how we draw deeper engagement and participation, both at home learning and in classroom learning, and tell a story in a unique way, and really bring about a curriculum that doesn't just highlight past historic events, but makes it relevant for today and opens up dialogue. Because what we saw the opportunity for was meaningful dialogue for students that is relevant today, for us to take action and be informed, make informed decisions. And this happened to launch just before the pandemic forced the closure of many schools in our country. And to have a free platform for students and teachers to access and use that was distributed nationally was an incredible success for us, and a real win. That became another, just one journey of moving into education, but I would like to highlight in the diversity and equity inclusion sense. So we've been a partner to Google for now 14 years. And about 3 years ago, also because of pandemic closures to offices, we were asked to create a virtual learning environment for diversity and equity and inclusion. So we partnered with a fabulous team called Performance Paradigm that has partnered with Google for many years now. And we created the infrastructure and the user interface and user experience for learning. And this is in a continued learning environment. And what we saw was an opportunity to create real change and go beyond what is the industry standard compliance. And this is what I'm talking about when we talk about true impact and meaningful change. So what we see then is leadership and managers start to change their perspectives and start to really lead in a different way, and a more informed way, an inclusive way, and embrace diversity. And these are the types of initiatives that are existing in the real world and in application. And we're getting more and more opportunities like that. As I mentioned earlier, there is not only now the appetite for it, but there's real budget for it, and people are treating it seriously. It no longer exists as a lip service, check the box. We've complied and done, corporate social responsibility quota. This is really now starting to take more precedent, and it's at the forefront. And businesses are starting to see that it really does help with attrition. It helps with onboarding and hiring and retaining people and building healthy cultures. These are the long-term benefits that businesses are really seeing value that they didn't really see maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Well, we have a new level of challenge for you, and that is that in our as Tom may have explained to you, in our evolution, where Humanity Rising, and Jim mentioned it in his introduction, is called Humanity Rising Network. And its intent is to revolutionize communication so that we can create a new global constituency of informed, proactive, engaged citizens who will pick up their responsibility for changing the world. So the concept that you are evolving and have been with organizations in the business and the technology sector, I think is a foundation for that kind of evolution of communications. Because you talked earlier about stovepiping, I think, and whatnot. And one of the things that is motivating us is that media and information, education, and community interactivity, those elements exist as in stovepipes. Media, for an example, is really good at repetitively announcing their analysis of an issue, offering no solutions whatsoever. Education, in many ways, Jim talks about a lot, and one of the reasons he created Ubiquity University was to make education relevant to the critical challenges of our time, rather than something that everybody got their homogenized version of and then went out in the world trying to figure out if they could apply it in any way, you know? So I think when you talk about social justice and you talk about true engagement and diversity and all of that, those are our goals on a global scale. And so I hope you're starting to sharpen your pencil and to think about how what you have learned can be applied in that direction.
Absolutely. And you know, one of the reasons that I was drawn initially to working with Google, and I think it's important to address, is creating greater access to opportunity and creating greater access to information so that we can make more informed decisions.
Yes.
And I think that sometimes we take those things for granted, and it's so vitally important to elevating the human experience. And, you know, for humanity rising to occur, we must all look at how we have equal access, create greater access to opportunity. And I know we're constantly seeking opportunities and engagements where we can do more of that. One of the things that our team is, this is a challenge and a mandate. We need to ask ourselves, what is the opportunity for us to influence this partner or client? What is the opportunity for us to stretch the bounds of what may have been done before? You know, no configuration or business is absolutely perfect, but there's always an opportunity to create a more harmonious configuration and to push the bounds. And that starts with us. It starts with us as a team. And hopefully that's something that is propagated, that is seen and celebrated, and people see it makes sense. For a variety of reasons. So yes, we are sharpening our pencils, and I am happy to say I think people are starting to really pay attention, and this is it's not as uncommon now in our industry as it was 10 years ago.
Maybe picking up on that, Sarah. So if I look at the journey of the workplace in America, it started with affirmative action decades ago. And it was legislated and it was mandated by the government, either at the federal or state level. And then eventually employers recognized that they were losing talent opportunities if they didn't have a diverse workforce in terms of being able to meet their needs of their clients or their customers or whoever they were serving. And so we started seeing some, discussions 20 plus years ago around diversity. And so taking affirmative action to diversity. And then there was a recognition of the need for, rather than just having token women in leadership roles or people of color or different backgrounds, inclusion became part of the equation. And then how do we create fairness for them? And we finally, after 50 plus years, in the workplace here in the US, we've arrived at this place of belonging. And part of how we've gotten there is the role of technology. And so when I look at other challenges that society is faced with, how do we truncate that 50-year journey or hundreds of year journey to really get at solving some of these issues and problems? And you, because you're at the heart of the technological world in Silicon Valley, any thoughts on that would be very exciting to discuss.
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head with belonging, because for the last 50 years or so, we've been meeting quotas and we haven't actually addressed the attitude changes needed. And, I loved your opening comments, George, around, really what this new framework and mindset shift is an opener for, a catalyst for. If we just go about our business and we, say, okay, we need more diversity and more representation, it discounts the importance of the true belonging and agency for contributions to occur. And that's really what we need within any organization, any business, any community, school. And there's a professor at UC Berkeley, John Powell, who says it best: it's not enough to be invited to the dinner party. If you're not able to actually make meaningful change and make contributions, just being there doesn't really solve any problems. So I really think about that a lot. And I think about, how do we create a real sense of agency from within? And that's why initiatives that focus on true change from within and address the cultural needs, attitude shifts, behavioral and mindset shifts, and that begins with really a very introspective journey and a transformative journey, one that can be very personal, one that can be incredibly challenging. We built a racial equity platform for one of our clients. And when I took this course, I thought, I'm going to ace it. Well, of course, it challenged my own biases that are sometimes, we all have inherent hidden biases. No matter what personal development or spiritual work we have done, that exists, and that's part of the human experience. And it is part of our journey to constantly be looking at those things and challenging those things. When we can do that then together and as a community, that gives rise to such meaningful organizational change. So some of the things that we've started to do as a team is we brought in community council. When we started to do this work in DE&I, we realized we can't do this work and create these environments and learning platforms if we ourselves aren't doing this work to change. We first have to see where are the biases that exist. And so through this, very, indigenous practice of, council, which we brought in, with our own version of a talking stick and done virtually, how we share and hear each other and see where each other are coming from. And then we begin to see our perspectives and where we sit and how these things can exist in such hidden ways. So that's where I think really the true change comes from. When we can do that, then we can bring about that for our partners.
So that level of consciousness that you've brought into Leftfield Labs, how is it being received with the clients that you're working with?
So yeah, I think our clients have been really receptive, and namely, two of them have been incredibly. They see the benefits. They see now organizationally that there are big changes underfoot, and it's all for the better. That this is helping. This is helping managers' skills. It's helping with leadership. And this is also measured through, direct reports and their input and feedback. So it's not just what we speculate or believe is happening, it's real, it's measurable. I think as far as our approach goes, this is a real differentiator. I don't think that there's any particular superpower around, putting into practice these things around ESG or DE&I. It's around the approach that we take, and it's a willingness to expand to a higher consciousness challenge status quo and ask deeper questions that can be really uncomfortable. I see, though, that our partners are really, they're seeing the impact of that. And I think that they're more willing than before to go on that journey with us too. I don't know if they're ready for community council yet on their own, but that'll come.
Well, you know, Sarah, I used to do a lot of work, as Tom has over the years, in working within large organizational cultures and helping them rethink who they are and why they were and all of the rest of that. And ultimately, I left the business because I found that I couldn't make enough of a difference. You know, I would work with a culture and we would evolve to a particular level. And then the board would make a management change and Joe Smith or Mary Jones would come in with a totally different philosophy. And I felt like Sisyphus, you know, rolling those rocks up the hill. I also realized, and it's interesting because we had a conversation about that yesterday. We had a couple of gentlemen from Germany and the Netherlands on the call. And they have a company called Weird, and Weird being, was it a Welsh word or an English word, Tom?
I don't know the linguistic origins of it, but it was definitely from the British Isles.
And so the concept of weird that they're creating is to look at the fundamental basis of organizational structure. And one of the issues, of course, is the concept of authority. And what I found when I was working a lot in the corporate sector was that I could expand the consciousness or help expand the consciousness of an organization to a certain degree until I came to the exterior boundary of who calls the shots and why they're calling them. And then there was always a diminishment of the amount of genuine authority that companies wanted to share or the empowerment of their employees. In fact, one of the CEOs of a large aerospace company pulled me aside one day and he said, you know, you're doing us an awful lot of good, but most of my good people, when they listen to you, they want to go out on their own and spread their wings and start doing some of the extraordinary things that their hearts have been telling them for a long time, you know? So I think what we are talking about is a fundamental reorientation toward some of those indigenous models that are not easy to get to. And yet, at the same time, we're dealing with a set of challenges that are time limited. Would you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, well, first of all, I think that you were way ahead of your time, and I'm not surprised that there was more resistance that you had encountered than what we see now.
Yeah.
And yet how incredible that you were involved with that vision and ethos. And that really set the stage for the work that we're doing and the receptivity that we see now. And I also just, before going into that more, I wanted to share one of my longtime heroes is Mr. Fuller. And, you know, among his interviews and writings, I love one in particular that in an interview, someone asked him, how do you grapple with the individual's impetus to impact real change and our ability as one person? How do you grapple with that? And he goes on to talk about the rudder of a ship and how, upon reflecting, this component of the rudder, this trim tab, is actually what creates for this low pressure. That is what shifts the trajectory of the rudder, and that changes the course and the direction for that ship. And if if one person can be that trim tab, this is Bucky, you know, then that would then enable for others to follow suit. Yeah. So he said, call me trim tab. So George, in many ways, I think you were a trim tab too. So I might call you that. It starts with one. It does start with one, and it really does catalyze so much change in ways that sometimes we ourselves can't see and measure. So
I'm sorry. I was in the Navy for a bit, and I was aboard a guided missile cruiser. I was working for the Admiral's staff. And when a command is given to a large ship to come about or change course, it can take well over 2 or 3 miles before that ship actually begins to respond, you know? And that's also something I think that what you're communicating is that that ship has begun to respond to some of the course headings and changes that were not as present when I was doing that kind of work, you know, and that's good to hear. The only question is, will the ship turn quickly enough to avoid collision or running aground or some of the other analogies that are likened to the time that we're living in, you know?
Absolutely. Well, if we all have the mindset that we all have agency and can function as that trim tab, and it starts with our own actions and starts with the deeper communication and collaborations that we can participate in, I do feel like anything is truly possible. But there is a sense of urgency that we all see and becomes ever pressing. 10 years ago, I would be in conversations with others around environmental impact initiatives. And I actually heard from some people back then that said, I don't believe in environmental initiatives. And it shocked me. I don't hear that so much today because it's staring at us. It's in our faces. Yet, you know, we still need to maintain vigilance in championing these causes. I know, Tom, early conversations that we had years ago are really shaped around how do we rebrand? You know, how do we rebrand reforestation? And how do we create a cultural mindset shift and establish new frameworks for addressing the realities of our climate change? And that really that is at the core of what's needed to really impart any meaningful solutions. I do see, though, that we're getting momentum, and that trajectory has shifted in tremendous ways that just several years ago didn't.
I'm wondering, as I'm listening to you and as we're talking, what would happen if the kind of team that you have assembled were to come together with the kind of team that we are assembling, where there's no hesitation, there's no barrier to what we believe is possible, no time constraint that would allow us not to move as fast as is humanly possible to get to a destination of social change and equity change and gender change and all the rest of these things, you know. So I'm just interested in that kind of a blue water environment.
Yeah. And, you know, it's incredible when you think about exponentiating with the combined visions and the backgrounds, expertise that we all have. And oftentimes roadblocks exist in access to budgets. And that's tremendously frustrating, you know, when we have vision and collective appetite. But how do we really start to demand as consumers that budgets be allocated to this very thing? How do we unify businesses and organizations with common aim? And there's no shortage of ideas and solution sets that occur. That gives me tremendous optimism. Whether we can get our acts together and get the budgets assigned to really get those wheels turning, that's the other part of the equation. And I think that is it's following, it's coming, but it's not happening as fast as I'd like it to.
If we look at in the work I do around organization assessment and development, I encourage the CEO and leadership teams that I work with to find what I call the culture carriers for the desired culture in the organization, and they are, using Bucky's language, they are the trim tab within the organization. And from a societal perspective, we see activists who oftentimes have the information, they have what's needed, but they're on the bleeding edge of where society is. And so it's empowering them, whether it's through something like Humanity Rising Network or other platforms that enable them to come together to be that trim tab for society.
Absolutely. It's so powerful. It is bringing tremendous hope for me that we're seeing this generate and become a reality more and more. So yes, and I will absolutely, and looking at the chats, I will absolutely join the after chat. And I always welcome ideas around this. It really does take the collective. It takes all of us to put our heads together and create these solution sets that exist and play on a much larger global stage.
So, Sarah, I think one of the things that you folks are working on are new kinds of virtual experiences that give audiences a more in-depth appreciation, a greater sense of being there versus simply watching from a distance. If you could project out as to what direction that is heading in, or if you had an ideal scene for that direction, what might it be?
Oh, goodness. What I would love to see are communities coming together and forming in ways that they haven't. We have access to technologies and infrastructure for efficient energy use and consumption, for healthcare, for on the ground needs and means that we have never had access to. But I would love to see communities form and be able to, almost in a healthy, challenging environment, learn and adopt from one another. And I feel like there's a larger infrastructure to be created there that would be an incredible benefit to this planet and for humanity. And I've done some early thinking around that, but this is still very blue sky. This is 10 years down the road, but I think for me it really does come to climate change and energy efficiency, and how can we really start to track and engage and create more conscious choices in a way that we know that we each have an impact and see the output of our choices too. That's something that I feel is a possibility with a larger sense of connectivity that we just don't have currently. So that's one. I think it comes to making better and informed decisions based on having visibility to information that we currently don't really have. And that's an opportunity that I really see. Something that I don't see governments as immediately answering this. I think that organizations are more suited for, and I see corporations in the driver's seat. Whether that's good or bad, I think that corporations are going to be the ones that can start to make meaningful change and then influence public policy. But that's where I would like to really challenge every brand, every organization to think about this. How do we really look at greater good scenarios and start to craft these and have dialogue around this? How does this impact not just the organization from a self-served standpoint, but for the audiences that we serve and the global communities that we reach, and in some cases that we don't immediately reach? But we are responsible. We live at a unique time in human history, and we have been granted these tools and have access to things that a lot of the people on the planet just do not have access to. And it's going to come from us. We are the ones to influence that and to create these new configurations that hopefully the rest of the world can benefit from. You know, one of the things that you mentioned earlier, George, that I wanted to come back to also, we talk about the dawn of, the Industrial Revolution and this new tech age that we're in. And really, when you look at the last 25 years or so of this wave of technology, we see very, very little benefit to humanity for the vast majority of our population. We really see just, the 1% of the 1% benefiting who have access to certain things, but we haven't seen a benefit to food supply. We haven't seen benefit to the environmental disasters upon us and climate change. And that's what I'm really interested in getting to. And I think that takes a mindset shift as well. So we're not just looking at it from our bubble of how we can incrementally benefit in our own worlds, but how we can really benefit the vast majority of humanity. That's what I'm interested in.
Welcome to Humanity Rising Network.
That's why it's a pleasure to be here.
I think at this point, we ought to bring in our resident Greek scholar and see if he wants to join us with some insights and questions. Jim, will you come on?
Thank you, George. Boy, Sarah, this is really quite extraordinary, just hearing all the ways that you have figured out to humanize corporations and various educational institutions. So I just, in the first instance, want to just salute you and acknowledge your mastery and underscore what George and Tom have been saying, that would love to have a deeper dialogue with you as we evolve Humanity Rising Network, because the way you're approaching sort of reality is exactly the way we affirm in our own way. And you have such a deep experience to draw from. There's a lot of wisdom there. So I just want to thank you for coming on and acknowledging that. I think my first question is, would love to hear more about your background and your own story of kind of how you came to this awareness. Just tell us your journey.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I went to school for design for emerging media, and what I loved about it was the interactive nature of this, that it's a nonlinear form of engaging with content and with story. And that felt to me more human. It felt more intrinsic to my need as self-discovery and curiosity, to embark in environments where I can learn at my own pace and in my own direction. And I began working within the experience design ecosystem realm about 22 years ago now. And 5 years into being at an agency, I realized, as I mentioned just briefly earlier, that there is a better way, maybe, or a way that felt more authentic to me as a creative. And, I spoke about a bit of the siloed approach that I had encountered in other configurations. That was really the genesis. It was a theory that there's a more fulfilling way for me to feel like I can utilize my creativity and my curiosity. That theory put to test began Leftfield Labs. So when I started it, it was really trying this thing out and seeing, like, is this more satisfying, and can we collaborate in a more meaningful way? And I saw the long-term game versus the short-term that I think a lot of companies, especially agencies back then, were really focused on, in that churn and burn. And that just didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. The other thing to address is the deep spiritual work that I've embarked on, and especially in the last 24 years or so. And for some time, I felt that it needed to be separate and bifurcated from, the actual on the ground work, the work of the work. But at some point I realized, no, actually, they are inextricably linked. And it was when I read one of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's books that that really hit home, that technology and spirituality are meant to coexist. They're not meant to be separate. Yet in the Western world, we really typically see them as very opposite, but it's the balance of the two. And so this is really what I'm talking about when we talk about human-centric technology or even heart-led. For me, that is spirituality. And I think that it's a more accessible way of talking about spirituality, really, for our clients and many of my team members, in fact, which I think spirituality can seem to be somewhat alienating, and that's okay. But we can all identify and relate to a human-centric approach. And so it's coupling that with technology. And back to something that came up earlier with something that as a woman leader, I do feel like my natural disposition is I want those things to coexist. And I think that they always must coexist. And we always need to look at utilizing technology as our primary tool in the toolbox, but it is always with the aim of a human-centric meaning and experience, and asking ourselves, how does the individual benefit, and what is the emotional takeaway, and what is the perception shift, and ultimately the behavioral change. So when we can start to deconstruct any problem from that lens, we start to create solutions that are, when I say human-centric technology uses, that's what I mean.
I'm struck that you identified your kind of spiritual awakening exactly 24 years ago. What happened?
Oh, I think it was a couple of things. I was finishing college, and that's a really interesting question, Jim. Goodness, I think I also had a major life moment. I was in a bicycle accident, actually, and I think nearly lost my life. And that creates a huge shift in our perspective. It creates an incredible change in how we see our own position in the world. And no longer are we just in our own bubble. Suddenly we see a much greater meaning and a greater responsibility. I've taken very seriously this life. And I know I personally want to have, I don't want to squander this opportunity, because wow, we're alive at such a unique time, aren't we?
Yeah.
What a unique time for humanity, and to be blessed with these opportunities that we have, the knowledge, the expertise, the resources, and to be in a position where we can truly usher in a new way of doing business, and hopefully champion that in a way that others will see makes so much sense, and that they'll also endorse and embrace. That's really what came as it dawned on me. And over the years has become more and more extreme. I would just say the other part of my own personal journey, I'm a mother to 2 young children. And I think what happens when you become a parent is a radical shift. We also see the legacy of what we leave behind.
Yeah.
And we see that we truly want to model for them and with them. And they have continued to be a tremendous inspiration for me, and challengers and teachers as well. So those are a bit of the variables or the aspects of what has informed the work I do and my philosophy and my approach.
Well, let me just ask you a quick follow-up question, given your experience of the accident and your work with Google. I've been struck in reading about Google's hiring policies, and as a high-tech company, they've come to the conclusion that the best people to hire are people who have had some kind of trauma from which they've emerged as a more holistic human being. And that's quite a remarkable insight for a high-tech company, because one would think they would hire people who know a lot about engineering, science, technology, math, right? But what they realize as they go through the interview process and so forth is that what's less important is than who you are is what you know is less important than who you are. And so I wonder, have you had any impact in Google in that reorientation of their hiring policies and their ethos, because it so exemplifies your own experience and what you're trying to bring into these companies?
I would like to say that I have had influence. I have not in that respect. It's interesting. I didn't realize that that was something that Google had even embraced in their hiring practices.
Yeah, there was a guy I read last year. Tom probably knows more about it than certainly I do. But one of the executive vice presidents made a speech where he said the worst people to hire are the guys from Harvard because they have no intellectual humility. And that the best people to hire are those, as I said, who've had some kind of trauma that they've reworked in a empowering way, because you can teach anybody the what, but it's the who they are that comes out of deep life experience. So your biography is exactly the Google optimum.
Well, I do think that as we look at trauma, and there are some great comments that have come in through the chat, it does create opportunity for new neurological pathways and new ways. And we start to work with a more clean slate. We have an opportunity suddenly to operate with a new mindset and framework and build those new pathways. And it makes a lot of sense, actually, that does that there's a metric there associated. We did a diversity annual report for Google that was very transparent, but that was not part of it. So I'm interested in learning a little bit more about the trauma aspect.
It's, as I've listened to this conversation, I've realized that I have a belief that says that no one is without trauma. It's only a question of whether or not the individual has the capacity or the willingness to acknowledge it and then to work with it or let it have its way with us eventually, And I also think that for those people who believe that spirituality and technology are separate realms, it's like trying to make chicken soup without chicken. Somehow or another, there's no nourishment in it. There's no content. There's only this liquid experience that is a bit of an illusion. But I do believe that the world at the moment is Henry Miller, the author, used to define humanity as being the quick and the dead, and that. I think that those of us, and I include all of us who have had trauma, who have been blessed or required to deal with it, do in fact emerge on that other side where wisdom and information come together, where chicken and soup end up making something nourishing.
Exactly. And whether we prefer to call it spirit or heart-led or purpose-led, I think what businesses can see is the success at the end of the day. Sometimes, they don't know whether there's chicken in the soup or not, or what the ingredients are called, but the fact is that there is a real impact. That's what people respond to. So the more we can create that awareness, that's really been our approach. So we're seeing more receptivity as our partners start to see that the impact is just more meaningful.
Sarah, I would love to just do a little bit of a deeper dive into your Harvard experience to find out a little bit more about what the challenge was, and then a little bit more about what exactly you did to enhance the learning experience for the students, because you were dealing with an issue that's fraught with controversy and prejudice and history when you're talking about race. So, for example, did you deploy critical race theory? Was that part of it? Did you steer away from it? Tell us a little bit more about the Harvard challenge.
Absolutely. So I should point that before we embarked on the journey, it did take us 2 years to get a grant approved from Rockefeller Foundation. And that we embarked on this before the Trump administration had been elected. And the situation was dire before that and became ever more pressing and needed during that administration from an awareness of our fundamental civil rights and awareness also of our history and engaging our students in meaningful dialogue. So what we knew way back at the beginning of the journey was very different from what it became. And there was an increased call to action and urgency that was even more pressing for us all. And one of the things that we decided, we worked alongside the Hutchins Center at Harvard, and this is led by Professor Skip Gates. And the initial vision, as we saw the success of what Hamilton did in taking history and making it incredibly exciting and entertaining for students, and what could, in a Broadway like environment, how could we tell the story that's just so much more resonant today? And we ultimately were able to partner and team up with Ava DuVernay, who of course is the incredible film creator behind movies like Selma. And what we did was we worked to really curate content and adapt it, taking from Selma, the film, creating these bite-sized pieces from the storyline, and working also with the Hutchins Center, as well as Southern Poverty Law Center. So we really combined these incredible ingredients from those three, and we adapted it for online engagement and learning. What Southern Poverty Law Center brought to the table was already deep understanding and curriculum development that was distributed in schools nationwide. So that was a massive head start for us. And I just really want to acknowledge SPLC. Of course, Ava DuVernay and Selma. Ava had already embarked on Array 101, which is education with films. And so it was a natural extension then for us to be able to work together to adapt the content from the films and really, take the entertainment factor and the appeal, how compelling that is, couple that with the SPLC curriculum, and then, with the orchestration with Hutchins Center, really devise this new curriculum set and engagement for students, so that suddenly it's not just linear in a passive or sit back.
Exactly.
It's more engaging. There are questions asked and participation required from an online learning and interactive capacity, and then different modes for learning. And this is something that, this is the early days for us and moving into education. But now what we're seeing also, and we're fully embracing, is multimodal pedagogy, and realizing, wow, to really truly embrace diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, we need to understand that we all have different learning needs and learning preferences. And what works for Tom is very different from what might work for me. Some of us are visual, some of us are auditory, some of us really need a bit more community and connection for dialogue. So this is something that we're now employing, and that's reflected in a lot of our other education initiatives. So that's a little bit more of the background. It took us, as I mentioned, several years getting the grant, and then we got into the deeper discovery, strategy, understanding, things like the biggest barrier for schools is not lack of devices, it's internet accessibility. So overcoming that challenge became a reality for us. So these are the things that in any engagement, we start to learn in a deeper, what are the deeper constraints, and how do we then create at-home learning modules? How do we circumvent certain barriers that may exist and create greater access? So anyway, just a few things there that I think speak to your, deeper, the details of that project.
Well, it's such a beautiful embodiment of everything that I think we're talking about here in terms of technologies of hope. When you bring together deep content that in itself is empowering and illuminating with a technological capacity to make it alive in an interactive way, you have everything that Plato and Aristotle dreamed about, because you're communing while you're deploying. And that's a fundamental symmetry. That's dialogue, right? It's a fundamental symmetry between content and technology, which, as we've been saying for the last several days, is an essential part in keeping technology pointed in the right direction. So you really did that masterfully, it sounds like, blending that content with live interactive technology. So that's just a beautiful accomplishment. And that's definitely what we're trying to do with Humanity Rising Network, because, you know, if you could develop a broadcast capacity so that the content that right now, a lot of organizations have content, but nobody knows about it because they don't have a capacity to getting it out there in the world. But if you can develop a global broadcast capacity linked to the content all around live interactivity that inspires action in the world, you've got really the wave of the future in a fundamental way about how human beings can be interacting both with technology, but also with liberating content simultaneously.
Yes. And what you say is so key here, which is, how does it inspire action?
Yeah.
In the case of this project, you know, we were aware that this is, you know, these are students that are not yet of voting age. So how do we inspire civic action and engagement in other ways for students to take action? And there are so many other opportunities, and that's what we ultimately wanted to create. We also, going back to a point you said earlier, we wanted to make sure that we weren't saying what is right and what is wrong. We never wanted
Exactly.
to
Exactly.
say, this is what you should believe. And we were very clear in working with the wonderful team at Hutchins Center at Harvard that this isn't about what is right and wrong, but this is about the presentation of the facts. This is about the accurate portrayal of our history in our country, of the civil rights movement, of the genesis and origin of what some of the very pressing issues are today. We wanted to present the facts and information for students to make informed decisions. So that is really another through line that is very important for us, so that we're not the arbiters of what is right or wrong, but we are creating that access, and we're delivering it in a way. And this is also something where I feel like in the recent years, you know, the sense of truth and access to truth has really been degraded. And how can we champion a better access to historical accounts and fact? And that really is something that is at our fingertips and is what we love to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, just to underscore the point you're making about not blaming and making judgment, but letting facts and stories speak for themselves. You know, we're preparing a major program in the new year around apology. Apologies we need to receive, apologies we need to give, apologies to the earth. And we're framing it just in the way that you've done with your Harvard project. It's not about judgment. It's about stories. It's about dialogue. It's about the willingness to enter into some of these thickets that perplex and challenge the human communities in a way that allows us to express what's happened and who we are and what's been done, but in a way that is beyond judgment. Because if you can pull that off, everybody then has an opportunity in, again, the genius of dialogue as an exemplification of the way nature works. Nature doesn't blame. Nature synthesizes the contraries. And you're really on a cutting edge, I would say, Sarah, of this capacity and technology. And I just want to say, I want to sit next to you at the next dinner, find out a lot more. And as we launch Humanity Rising Network, I would love in some way to bring you in as a partner, because this is exactly the thinking that not only humanity needs to employ, that it's all one thing with different facets, but it's the future of a taming of a technology or a capacity that humans have developed through technology that has now gone out of control.
Absolutely. Well, call us trim tabs, because
Yeah.
all here to do and to remind and support in each other and in our initiatives. So,
Sarah, I also want to say that I noticed inadvertently that you were playing with a pencil while you were talking, rather than a pen. And that's always a good sign.
I didn't realize the pencil was visible, but there it is.
There it is.
Tom, do you want to give us a quick final word, and then George tee us up for what's happening on our final day tomorrow?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll just say, Sarah, I have so enjoyed working with you over the years, and your friendship and the ability to work together. And I'm just so grateful for you to bring your brilliance to our dialogue today. So thanks for being with us.
Hey, Tom, likewise. It's a pleasure.
So tomorrow we're going to close out the week with a couple of interesting human beings, one of whom is trying to reinvent what roads are made of and how they're built. And, roads play such an incredible impact on our environment, and a negative impact in many ways. And we're also going to be dealing with someone who has made a journey from Wall Street through entrepreneurship, and now is an incredible champion of solar and some of the other mitigating energy sources. So, Sarah, it's been a pleasure to have you here. And this is, I'm sure, the first of many. So thank you very much.
Thank
Jim?
you all.
So much, Sarah. This has been masterful and deeply inspiring, and exemplifies the way we need to interrelate with technology for not only the human good, but the good of technology and the good of the larger ecosystem. As we close, I want to also note that this Saturday we're having a sort of a year-in course that we're offering to our community that's very much in the spirit of this conversation today. And this is on the adoration of Aphrodite, the adoration of the goddess of love, sexuality, and beauty, which really needs to undergird everything that human beings do in terms of what we honor and what we support. So it's just a 2-hour final gift from Ubiquity University to our community. I've put the link in the chat. It'll be a marvelous time with a great mythologist, Mariam Syed, and we look forward to having as many of you join as possible. You can get the link on the front page of the ubiquityuniversity.org website. So that brings us to a close for today, everyone. You can join the after chat with Sarah. You'll see the link in the chat box that Stan is just putting up. And we'll see you then tomorrow for our 5th and final day of the Technologies of Hope. But in closing, George and Tom, this has been a sensational week. And Sarah, you are off the charts. You embody the future in a way that I haven't seen on this program for some time. And I just want to acknowledge it out of the adoration of my heart for you. I really want to get to know you better and include you more in what we're developing here, because it's deeply profound, it's deeply humble, and it's audacious beyond imagination. So thank you.
That is how we'll be catalysts for change together.
Thank you, everyone.